Hello, everyone. And it's such a joy to be with Bridge Church again. I always so enjoy the worship at Bridge Church. Thank you for that very wonderful reminder that God's love runs after us. Okay, this morning we are looking at the story of Nehemiah, but around that story, we have a verse. And that verse, the verse for the day.
Immediately after the service, we will be having the hub. So do stay back.
Okay, got it. Josh, should I carry on?
Please carry on. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So here we are starting with a text, a verse that we want to wrap around the story of Nehemiah. And this text comes from Psalm 68:19. It's a neat little verse and one that not too many people know about. So it's a little gem tucked away in the Psalms. And this is how the verse reads. Psalm 68, verse 19. Praise be to the Lord, to God, our Savior, who daily bears our burdens. Praise be to the Lord, who daily bears our burdens. Now, with that, let's jump right into the story of Nehemiah. Nehemiah, we all know, was cupbearer to the emperor of Persia. We have carvings on stone walls from that period that give us an idea of what that position meant to be a cupbearer. In these stone carvings, you see the emperor on his chair like throne, holding a scepter in one hand and a carved lotus bud in another. These are the symbols of his kingship. And before him is a row of petitioners bowing low in deference. Behind him stands the crown prince in training for the day when he will take his father's place. And just behind the crown prince, with a folded towel in his hand, stands the royal cupbearer. You couldn't be closer to the most powerful man in the known world, unless, of course, you were the crown prince himself. You couldn't be more trusted either. In fact, in these days of heirs who impatiently took shortcuts to the throne, the emperor probably trusted his cupbearer even more than he did his crown prince. The cupbearer was the king's defense against being bumped off by ambitious rivals. The cupbearer ensured that the wine he handed the king was safe. In fact, before he offered the king the cup, he would drink a sample sip, wipe the rim dry with the towel meant just for that purpose, and only then would he offer the king a drink that he wouldn't die of. We are not sure how a deportee like Nehemiah from the outer edges of the empire, from Judah, came into this enviably high rank. But perhaps it was just that Nehemiah, being a Judahite, had no stake in the Persian Game of Thrones. Being a cupbearer meant that you lived in the capital city of a great empire, and your address was no different from that of Artaxerxes, the emperor. Now, this is where Nehemiah unsuspectingly enters the board game, just like in the movie Jumanji. Nehemiah enters the board game. He enters that board game just as unsuspectingly as we have entered 2020. You know the beginnings of that story. He travels all the way a long and grueling journey from Susa, the capital of Persia, to Jerusalem. It would be a journey that would take you today from Iran to Israel. Nehemiah goes far for the job he plans to do. And under cover of darkness, with just a few others, he makes a survey of the structure he intends to rebuild. That is, the walls of Jerusalem. So, note that. He starts with a site survey, but does it under cover of night. Perhaps Nehemiah wants to take on his challenges one at a time. He is unsure of the scale of the enterprise. He is equally unsure of the willingness of the local leaders to undertake that project. So the secret survey gives him the space to quietly work out the magnitude and the cost and the manpower for the project. The next step will be to present this project to the leadership of Jerusalem as persuasively as he can. Chapter 2, 17 to 18. And I said to them, that is to the leadership of Jerusalem, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and we will no longer be in disgrace. And to his surprise, they replied, let us start rebuilding. If Nehemiah is in a board game, the board game is Snakes and Ladders. And here is the first ladder. With the first roll, he is on a ladder. And I'll ask Josh to keep typing up these ladders and snakes that we will come to in the chat box. Ladder. What is a ladder? My colleagues like my proposal. Josh, can you type that up? Ladder. My colleagues like my proposal. However, once the building commences, the non-Jewish populations gather round to offer their observations. And what may those observations be? They mocked and they ridiculed us, Nehemiah says in 2:19. They say, what are these feeble Jews doing? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are? And as if that is not insult enough, they add, what are they building? Even a fox climbing up on it would break down their walls of stone. Nehemiah has run into a snake. Type that up, Josh. Snake. And what is the snake? The people are against me. There are people against me. That is his snake. There are people against me. What does Nehemiah do? Swallowed by the snake. He turns to the God who daily bears our burdens. Nehemiah 4, 4 to 5. Hear us, O God, he says. Hear us, because we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders. Nehemiah remains faithful to his task, and bit by bit, the gaps in the walls begin to close up. Nehemiah, to his credit, has managed to recruit into the project the whole population of Jerusalem, people who have never handled a spade or never met a plumb line, are all in it together. There are priests, including the high priest himself. There are goldsmiths whose hands are accustomed to fine, intricate work rather than to the clearing of tons of debris. There are perfumers, imagine, perfumers who know how to make delicate measurements, but now are mixing slurries of mortar. There are Levites, there are temple servants, there are gate guards, there are merchants, and most intriguing are the daughters of Shallum, women, daughters of Shallum, a high ranking official. And these women take on a whole section of the wall alongside their father, Shallum, who is the ruler of a half district of Jerusalem. So the criterion here appears to be not what work you've been doing with your hands. It's enough if you have a pair of hands. This is not just Nehemiah's team, but there are people from outside Jerusalem who are on the project. The men of Jericho have come to build a city they don't even live in. There are rulers of surrounding districts who really only have a very minimal benefit from a rebuilt Jerusalem. There are priests from nearby regions whose only reason for joining in might be to honor the city that is the site of the temple. Nehemiah has hit a ladder, a great big tall ladder. And what is this ladder? I have a great team to work with. That is his ladder. I have a great team to work with. But you know how the board game goes. There are snakes. There is an unsavory trio of opposers. There's a gentleman called Sanballat, who's possibly a Samaritan. There is Tobiah, who is an Ammonite. And there is Geshem, who is an Arab. And these people, this trio, seems to have nothing else to do with their time than to hatch plots to keep Judah weak. A ruined Jerusalem suits their political agenda. To stop Nehemiah's project, they had first tried ridicule. I read that out to you. Now they're trying intimidation. On one visit to Jerusalem, they brought the Samaritan army along. And as the repairs went ahead, they plotted to attack and kill the wall builders. Now, as the wall is completed and only the gates need to be set into place, Sanballat and Geshem change their tactics. They send Nehemiah a letter inviting him to meet them in the area of a city called Ono, which would have been some 45 kilometers northwest of Jerusalem, on the edges of the region settled by the returning Jews. Nehemiah immediately smells a rat and declines to meet them. 4 more times they repeat their invitation, and each time Nehemiah returns the same response. And then in the 5th letter, Sanballat changes his tune. He writes quite differently. He says he has heard that the purpose of the building of the defenses of Jerusalem is so that the Jews can now declare independence from Persia. Now, considering the back-breaking taxes they pay, anybody would believe Sanballat's story. What is more, Sanballat says he has heard that Nehemiah has ambitions to become king over Judah and has hired prophets to make the way for him. Now, this accusation is tantamount to treason. In our country, we'd probably call it anti-national activity. This is a very serious charge. If it gets to the ears of the king, Nehemiah would be punished by death. The letter concludes with unmistakable blackmail. 6:7. Now, this report will get back to the king of Persia. So come, let us meet together. It is clear to Nehemiah that his enemies are trying to lure him out of Jerusalem and intend to do him harm once they get their hands on him. And shortly, he's going to realize the extent of their reach. They have a long arm. He's not safe even in Jerusalem, his own home city. He is going to meet prophets that his enemies have hired to keep the psychological assault going. They prophesied death at the hands of assassins, these prophets. And Nehemiah will soon realize that not only are the prophets of Jerusalem against him, but that key Judahite nobility have turned into a little spy ring. The harassed Nehemiah muses 6:9. They were all trying to frighten us, thinking their hands will get too weak for the work and it will not be completed. Snake. What is the snake? There are people seriously against me. There are people seriously against me. And Nehemiah once again turns to the God who daily bears his burdens. 6:14. O God, remember Tobiah and Sanballat, my God, because of what they have done, trying to intimidate me. Rather than pack up and go back to the pleasurable, stable life that awaits him in Persia, he prays, now strengthen my hands. And his hands carry on, courageous against intimidation. And in a record 52 days, the wall gets completed. Big ladder now. Ladder. And what's this ladder? My project has been completed. That's his ladder. My project has been completed. But there is a snake around the bend. While the walls were being built, the people brought a problem to him. Rich Jews are into money lending. They are charging interest rates that bankrupt the poor borrowers who now have no option but to actually sell their children into slavery, a little bit like bonded labor. So there is a deep unrest among the poorer population of Judah. Those with large families are beginning to starve because of recurrent famines, and the low yields, out of which, remember, the king's taxes have to be paid. Others have staved off starvation, but at great cost. They have mortgaged their real estate, houses, fields, vineyards to buy grain. And unable to pay back their loans, they find the creditors foreclosing on them. Some lose their lands and their homes, and those who have nothing left but their children, have their children forcibly taken away and sold as slaves. Nehemiah hears of this, and it makes him not just frustrated, it makes him furious. Snake. My family, my own family, is giving me headaches. My family is giving me a hard time. As he puts an action plan together, Nehemiah again leans into the God who daily bears his burdens. 5:19. Remember me with favor, my God, for all that I have done for these people. Educated man that he is, Nehemiah knows well that the law of Moses is deeply concerned for those whose poverty forces them into debt. Deuteronomy 15, Deuteronomy 24. The law stringently mandates against charging interest on loans to the needy. Exodus 22. Even those who are so poor that slavery is the only way out are protected by laws that enable them to gain their freedom. Nehemiah hears of this injustice and is more than a little upset. 5 6. I was very angry, he says. Should he get involved? Well, he came to rebuild the city's defenses, not to defend its poor. But eventually, Nehemiah cannot help getting involved. Nehemiah is your accidental reformer. He is a leader who serves those that everyone else uses to serve themselves. Nehemiah fortunately has the clout to call together a large meeting of nobles and officials, those involved in the money lending racket. He calls them to account. And by the time he has finished ticking them off about charging interest and foreclosing, all they could do was to keep quiet because they could find nothing to say. 5:8. Shortly, they will meekly obey Nehemiah's orders to return the confiscated properties and to stop charging interest on loans. They will even, 5:11 to 12, take an oath to do what they had promised. In one sitting, Nehemiah has forcibly reformed the Judahite money lending gang lords. Indeed, to his credit, 5:13, the people did as they had promised. Ladder. And what is this ladder? My family is a decent lot after all. That's his ladder at this point. My family is a decent lot after all. Next, Nehemiah turns his attention to the temple, where everything has gone, as we say, to the dogs. The daily rituals and sacrifices require personnel, and personnel need to be paid salaries. So Nehemiah revives the system appointed in the law for provisions. Judahites are now required to bring in contributions, first fruits, and tithes. These are to be stored in the storerooms of the temple complex. That's what those storerooms were built for in the first place. Then men are appointed to be in charge of these storerooms, which means they will do the disbursing or the distribution of the provisions to the temple personnel, which will be the priests and the Levites. There are even gatekeepers dedicated to guarding the storerooms, and we even have their name list in chapter 12. Another temple operation that Nehemiah sets in place is the choir, what we would call the worship team. Nehemiah's desire is to recreate the choir system that David, long ago in the glory days of Israel, that choir system that David had put together. For the dedication of the freshly completed walls of Jerusalem, he searches out musicians and finds that, to his convenience, they have built communities for themselves in the Jerusalem area. Not only is Nehemiah keen to find professional musicians, but he insists that the musical instruments should be 1236 as prescribed by David, the man of God. Nehemiah also remembers that long ago, in the days of David and Asaph, there had been directors for the musicians and for the songs of praise and thanksgiving to God. 1246. So now Nehemiah appoints a choir master under whose direction two choirs, not just one, two choirs perform. Nehemiah sounds awfully pleased that he has been able to revive the system and ensures that the choirs are maintained by the goodwill of the people. 1247. So, in the days of Nehemiah, all Israel contributed the daily portions for the musicians. And then he turns his attention to the oversight of the city. And for this, he carefully selects capable and trustworthy men. Very strategically, he partners a civilian with a soldier. In charge of Jerusalem are my brother Hanani, that's the civilian, along with Hananiah, the commander of the citadel, that's the soldier, because Hananiah was a man of integrity and feared God more than most people do. So he has these two civic leaders set in place. And after that, he puts into order another system which has fallen by the wayside for lack of enforcement. And this is the Sabbath rest. He instructs Hanani and Hananiah 7:3. The gates of Jerusalem are not to be opened until the sun is hot. While the gatekeepers are still on duty, have them shut the doors and bar them. So he has the people understand and agree to the importance of observing the Sabbath, when to shut the doors to commerce and when to open them to invite commerce to begin again. The Sabbath day is set aside for rest. Then Nehemiah clinches his reforms with a binding agreement that pulls together the leaders and the people, an agreement that they make to live in observance of the law of Moses. The clauses of that binding agreement agree that they will not intermarry with non-Jewish peoples of the land. They will not violate the Sabbath by buying goods, even though non-Jews have sales going on. They will observe the Sabbath of the land once in 7 years by letting it lie fallow. They will cancel debts, presumably in the Jubilee year. And then there's a list of clauses that particularly apply to the temple. The people swear that they will regularly pay the half shekel temple tax each year for its maintenance. The people swear that they will make annual contributions in kind to the temple. They will faithfully bring in the first fruits from field and barn, a tenth or a tithe of the various harvests. 10:30 to 39. We will not neglect the house of our God, they swear. All of this reform, social, economic, and religious, is born out of Hezekiah's vision for a law observant community. And his reforms are well accepted, well received, well observed. Big ladder, big ladder. And what's this ladder? My plans have come together to my satisfaction. Very significant ladder. My plans have come together to my satisfaction. After 12 years of all of this reform, Nehemiah is recalled to Persia. And a couple of years later, he gets royal permission to return to Jerusalem. When he returns to Jerusalem, he finds that every aspect of his reform has fallen by the wayside. Every aspect, religious, social, economic. The first fruits and tithes haven't been distributed as they should have been. Perhaps a temple mafia was hoarding them or quietly selling them off. As for the Sabbath day, it was business as usual, selling and buying even within the precincts of the holy city. As for the promise against intermarriages, Jews had daughters in law from all the surrounding nations. Even the high priest's grandson had married into the family of Sanballat the Horonite, the same fellow who had tried to bring Nehemiah and his wall building project to ruin. In the temple, the high priest Eliashib has sublet one of the storerooms to an Ammonite who is by the Mosaic law banned from entry into the sacred temple. The same Ammonite Tobiah who had provided Nehemiah with a season of sleepless nights with his death threats. Nehemiah returns to Jerusalem to be swallowed by a snake. Snake. Nothing is going according to plan. That's a big snake. Nothing is going according to plan. And as he scrambles into action, Nehemiah keeps his conversation with God going. The God who, remember, daily bears his burdens. Remember me for this also, my God, and show mercy to me according to your great love. 13:22. That's the story of the man who got trapped into a board game of snakes and ladders. How long till he reaches home? That little cell in the top left-hand corner, if I remember right, of that board game. How long till he reaches home? But that's really not the point of the book, it appears, because the book ends with Nehemiah definitely not having reached home. When the book closes, he's very much in the game, still playing. So then, the book of Nehemiah is not about a man who got trapped into a board game. It's about a man who, one way or another, quite unsuspectingly jumped into a board game and realized that he didn't need to know when he could go home. He found himself continuing to play even though there were as many snake days as there were ladder days. See, Nehemiah could have ended at chapter 6. That is where the wall has been built. The project is completed. The book of Nehemiah could have ended at chapter 6. That's if Nehemiah had returned to Babylon after the task he came to do was completed. Instead, chapter 6 is only in the middle of the book. 7 chapters follow. That's because Nehemiah's task grows and morphs as it goes. The game goes on much longer than the time he originally set apart for it. Nehemiah doesn't just rebuild the city's walls, he gets into the reconstruction of the community. Rebuilding the walls takes, as we said, 52 days. There are snakes here that he has to deal with, various unexpected challenges that keep popping up with alarming frequency. He works with poor construction material, his workforce is scarily amateur, he is beset by psychological propaganda from his opponents. There are rumors of assassination plots, there are guerrilla attacks threatened, but ladders. He comes out of that as a clever civil engineer working on post war reconstruction. He comes through as a perceptive human resources manager. He comes through as a hard nosed diplomat and even a military strategist. That's the wall building. The community building takes him far longer, nearly 12 years. This part of the game requires him to take on the role of a religious reformer, an advocate of social justice, the convener of a national assembly, the drafter of a national memorandum of understanding, and somewhere in between all this, he even does a short stint as public event manager. He constantly meets surprises, not always nice ones. The community he's seeking to heal is not always on his side. Sometimes they are ready to mutiny. Sometimes they are agents of the enemy. Sometimes they are selling each other into slavery. At other times, they are weeping in repentance and swearing oaths of obedience. Snakes and ladders. You remember how enthusiastically we entered 2020. A long time ago, it now seems. It's a new decade, we said. And we got into it. We got into 2020 a little like Nehemiah came to Jerusalem from Persia. Neither Nehemiah knew, nor did we know what we were getting into. How do we survive the shock of our current situation? Not by constantly asking, when will we reach home? Are we there yet? When will we reach home? That little cell in the top left hand corner of the board game. When will we get home? That is not the way to survive 2020, but like Nehemiah, to be constantly trusting in a God who, remember this, a God who daily bears our burdens. God goes with us up each ladder and down each snake every day, every single day. When will we reach home? When will we exit this difficult season? God knows. God certainly knows. But according to the book of Nehemiah, which ends on a snake note, we don't need to know. According to the book of Nehemiah, we don't need to know when this season will end. All that we need to know is that we are on the board and we must keep going. We must keep playing. Keep going, knowing that daily God walks beside us, offering to be our burden bearer. What greater confidence, what greater assurance. Josh, I'll hand it over to you to pray.